The year is 479 BC. On a beach near Salamis, the tide drags at burned wood and shattered shields. The sand is dark with ash, and the air tastes like salt, smoke, and something metallic. Something wrong. The Persian fleet is gone, burned, scattered, defeated. Greece won. That's what the poets will write. That's what will be carved into marble and sung in symposiums for the next 0 years. But right now, on this beach, there's a sound coming from the hills that no epic ever mentions. Screaming, not the battle kind, not the kind fueled by adrenaline, glory, or the hope of a quick death. This is different. High roar, scraping out of the throat until nothing is left but breath, terror, and the horrible truth that no one is coming to save you. The screams rise from a tent city stretching for miles along the coast. Thousands of canvas shelters, row after row, flapping in the wind like the sails of a ghost fleet. These aren't barracks, they're holding pens. And inside them lie the spoils of war, not gold, not land, women, daughters of Athens, Corinth, Thebes, Megara, girls who watched their fathers die in the streets, mothers who hid their children in cisterns, wells, even storage jars, praying they would suffocate quietly instead of being found. Women who thought watching their cities burn was the worst thing imaginable. They were wrong because they were still alive, and what Xerxes and his commanders did to them in the months that followed, what they systematically carried out, wasn't mercy. It wasn't even simple cruelty. The ancient world had a word for it. Our history books soften it, translate it as enslavement, but that's not what it was. What happened to these women, documented in Persian administrative tablets, confirmed in Greek testimonies, traced in the bones from mass graves near Sardis, was structured, intentional, designed not just to punish Greece, but to erase it from the inside out. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth, it's whether you're willing to remember what these women endured while the rest of the world celebrated a Greek victory. If you've ever wondered why certain chapters of history are told through men on battlefields instead of the women left in the ruins, then you're in the right place. Here on Crimson Historians, we dig through the archives the world forgot. The tablets buried under palace floors, the mass graves no one wants to mention, the one-line testimonies carved into stone by people who knew they'd be erased. Before we continue, if you're drawn to stories pulled straight from documented records, the ones Holly would never touches, then subscribe to Crimson Historians. Every like, every share, every subscription helps us uncover more accounts deliberately scrubbed from the narrative. Now return with me to that coastline, because what happens next challenges everything your textbooks chose to leave out. The tragedy of Hellas's daughters can't be understood without examining the machine that destroyed them. Xerxes I wasn't just a king. He embodied an empire stretching from the Indus to the Aegean. An empire that didn't rely on brute force alone, but on a system so efficient and deeply embedded in Persian culture that it functioned like a second government. They called it the harem system, but the word misleads. It wasn't about pleasure or luxury or the fantasies modern culture imagines. It was about control, about taking the daughters of your enemies and turning them into symbols of submission. About creating a generation of mixed blood administrators loyal to Persia, not the homelands their mothers came from. When Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC, he brought 500,000 men. Soldiers, yes, but also slavers, scribes, and officials whose job wasn't to fight. It was to document everything, every city that fell, every island that surrendered, every village that resisted and burned. They recorded who lived, who died, and, most importantly, who could be taken. The girls were the priority, not because the Persians were uniquely cruel. Many ancient empires did this, but because Xerxes understood something others didn't. You don't destroy a people by killing their men. You destroy them by taking their daughters and raising the next generation to speak your language, worship your gods, and forget their mothers ever had another home. By the time the Persian army retreated after Salamis and Plataea, over 40 Zero Greek women and children had been absorbed into the Persian administrative network. Most were shipped east to Sardis or Susa. Some became domestic labor on estates. The young, the beautiful, the daughters of noble families were drawn into the royal harem system, not for pleasure, for integration. If this part of history doesn't move you to dig deeper, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors tried to leave behind. The most dangerous thing an empire can do isn't kill you. It's make you forget who you were. Now picture the beach at Phaleron, just south of Athens, summer 479 BCE. The Persian army is preparing to retreat, but not empty-handed. Greek civilians who didn't escape in time, the old, the young, the stubborn are being processed. That's the word the Persians used. Processed, like grain, like timber, like cargo. A man oversees it all. Artabazos, a Persian general mentioned by Herodotus and found on administrative seals from Persepolis. He isn't watching the battle, he's watching the harvest. That's what the Persians called it. Baraftan, the taking of yield. Women are separated first, then sorted by age. Girls under 12 go into one group, destined to be raised as servants, taught Persian, slowly reshaped until the Greek words for mother and home feel foreign. Women over 30 are sent to labor camps in Thrace, places where life expectancy is measured in seasons, not years. But the ones in between the 13 to 25-year-olds, those are the ones Artabazos examines personally. A girl is pulled from the line. She's from Megara, maybe 16. Her hair is tangled with dust and sea salt, her tunic ripped at the shoulder. She doesn't fight, not because she's obedient, but because she already knows what happens when you resist. Her mother screams anyway. A Persian soldier hits her hard across the face, knocking her to her knees. But he doesn't kill her. They need her alive to watch. That's part of the system too. You don't just take the daughters. You make the mothers understand resistance is useless, that even their daughters' bodies now belong to the empire. The girl from Megara is taken into a tent. Inside sits a Persian scribe at a low table, clay tablets and stylus ready. He doesn't look at her eyes. He looks at her teeth, her hands, the way she stands. He notes her age, her height, the condition of her teeth, any scars, signs of virginity. These aren't soldiers, they're administrators. This isn't chaos, it's a bureaucracy. One intact seal from Persepolis, translated in the 1930s by German archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld, includes a chilling line. Delivered to Susa, 120 Greek females, ages 14-22, sorted and prepared for royal service from Athens, Thebes, and Corinth. Condition acceptable. Condition acceptable. That's how the Persian Empire saw the daughters of Hellas, as inventory, but it gets worse. What happened next wasn't random cruelty, it was policy. The girls chosen for the harem system were loaded onto ships headed east, but not all at once. Some were held back in camps along the coast of Asia Minor for weeks, sometimes months. Why? Because the Persians had learned something from earlier conquests. If you take a woman and put her straight into service, she resists. She remembers, she still believes someone will rescue her or ransom her, or that the gods will intervene. But if you break her first, strip her name, her language, her identity, she integrates more easily. And the most effective way to break a person isn't violence, it's humiliation, forcing them to participate in their own erasure. A fragment of an epitaph from the 4th century BC tells the story of a Corinthian girl named Clyce. She was 13 when the Persians captured her. She survived, and decades later returned to Greece as an old woman. At a temple near Olympia, she left an inscription. I was Clyce, daughter of Nicodemus. They took me in the year of the fire. They gave me a new name I will not speak. I served in the house of the king's cousin for 16 years. When they freed me, I had forgotten the hymns my mother taught me. I have come here to remember. This stone will remember for me. 16 years. She was 29 when she was freed, and she had forgotten the hymns of her childhood. That isn't simple enslavement. That is cultural annihilation. The camps holding these women weren't prisons. They were re-education centers. Girls were taught Persian, how to bow, how to cook Persian meals, how to dress, how to behave. Those who resisted were starved. Those who cooperated received slightly better treatment, and those who resisted too much. There's a mass grave near Sardes excavated in 1958. Inside were the remains of more than 300 women dated to the early 5th century BC. Their bones showed malnutrition, blunt force trauma, systematic abuse. Archaeologists noticed one haunting detail. Most of the skulls were positioned facing west, as if even in death they were trying to go home. By late 479 BC, the first wave of Greek captives reached Susa, the administrative heart of Persia. The city was massive, glittering, almost unreal to a girl from a Greek village. Columns taller than any temple in Athens. Gardens full of flowers with no Greek names. Air thick with incense, cardamom, and a sweetness she couldn't place. And at the center was the palace complex where the royal harem lived. This is where myth meets horror. Hollywood imagines veils and luxury, but the Persian royal harem wasn't a playground. It was a political engine, a place where the daughters of conquered peoples were transformed into tools of the empire. According to the Persepolis fortification tablets, documents preserved because they were baked in Alexander's fire, women entering the harem system were classified into ranks. At the bottom, domestic servants. Above them, concubines at the top, those chosen to bear children for Persian nobles. This wasn't about pleasure, it was about integration. Children born from Greek mothers and Persian fathers would grow up Persian, but with enough Greek heritage to serve as intermediaries, translators, administrators in newly conquered territories. It was genetic colonialism. But not every girl made it through. A girl named Thalia, her name preserved in a Babylonian tablet dated to 477 BC, arrived at Susa at 15. The record says she refused integration and was placed in a disciplinary unit. Another document explains what that meant. Forced labor in palace weaving rooms for 14 hours a day, minimal food, zero contact with other Greek captives. She survived only 8 months. Cause of death, exhaustion. Yet some girls did survive the system, and what happened to them might be even harder to face because they became part of it. A letter found in the dry sands of Bactria, translated in the 1970s, was written by a woman named Roxane, another Greek name meaning bright. She writes to her sister in Thessaly around 470 BC, "I am well. I have learned the language. I have learned the prayers. The king's steward has taken me as a secondary wife. I've given him a son. He is beautiful. He has your eyes, but he will never know your name. Please do not try to find me. I am not who I was. I am not who I was." That sentence should haunt you. Roxane survived. She ate, she slept, she rose in status. She had a child, and in exchange she gave Persia a son who would grow up knowing nothing of Greece, nothing of Athena, nothing of the songs she once knew as a girl. This was Persia's true strategy, not massacre. Massacre creates martyrs, songs, legends. Assimilation erases you quietly. By the mid-5th century BC, thousands of mixed Greek, Persian children served throughout the Achaemenid Empire. Some became scribes, some soldiers, some governed the very lands their mothers once called home. Xerxes didn't just try to conquer Greece, he tried to absorb it. If you're still watching, it's because you know this story deserves to be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians, not for us, but for them, for the girls whose names were erased, for the mothers who watched their daughters taken east and never saw them again. This is their testimony. And it only survives if we refuse to let it fade. Not all of them stayed in Persia. A few, very few, found their way back. In the decades after the Persian Wars, as Greek states grew stronger and Persia's hold on the Aegean weakened, a slow trickle of women began returning home. Some were freed by sympathetic owners, some ransomed by desperate families, and a rare few escaped on their own. But when they came home, they discovered something devastating. Home wasn't home anymore. There's an inscription from Eretria dated around 460 BC. It tells the story of a woman named Harmonia who returned after 12 years in Persian captivity. She was 28. She brought a child with her, a boy, half Persian, maybe 6 years old. The city refused to recognize her as a citizen, Her own family refused to take her back. The reason, written bluntly in the city's legal archives, she had been defiled by barbarian touch, and had borne a child of mixed blood. To accept her would be to accept the enemy. She and her son were turned away. The inscription ends there. We never learn what became of them. This is the part of history that doesn't fit the heroic Greek narrative. Because Greece won the war, Athens rose as the center of democracy, philosophy, art. The Persian invasion was repelled and the world celebrated. Poets wrote epics, sculptors carved marble, and no one wanted to talk about the daughters who came back broken, or the ones who never returned at all. The historian Theopompus, writing in the 4th century BCE, made a passing comment about these survivors. Greek women taken by the Persians who lived on the edges of society, unable to reintegrate, unable to speak of what happened to them. He wrote, "They are like shadows. They move through the agora, but no one sees them. They were taken, and though they returned, they are still gone. The silent women, that's what Greece called them." And then eventually Greece stopped calling them anything at all. By the time Herodotus wrote his histories in the late 400s BC, the story had shifted entirely to battles and strategy, the glory of Greek resistance. He mentioned Persian captives once in a single line. Many Greeks were taken, but in time some returned. That's it. That was all he gave them. But the graves don't lie. Across Greece, especially in areas that faced heavy Persian occupation, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites from the mid-5th century BC containing the remains of women with unusual markers, signs of long-term malnutrition, healed and unhealed trauma, and in several cases, evidence of childbirth at extremely young ages. One grave near ancient Thebes held the skeleton of a woman in her early 20s. Beside her was a small clay tablet inscribed in Greek, "I am daughter of no one. I am mother of no one. I am the forgotten. Let this mark that I was. No name." Just that. So why does this story matter? Because it's not about Xerxes. It's not even about Persia. It's about what happens when empires decide the strongest weapon isn't the sword. It's silence. Xerxes invaded Greece and lost. His fleet burned at Salamis. His army was crushed at Plataea. By military standards, Greece won. But if you measure victory differently, if you count the daughters taken, the identities erased, the mothers who spent the rest of their lives staring toward the eastern horizon, then the answer becomes harder. These women didn't die heroic deaths. They didn't become martyrs. Most simply vanished into the machinery of an empire, assigned new names, forced to bear children who grew up Persian, disappearing from Greek memory entirely. And Greece allowed that forgetting to happen, because to remember them would mean admitting that victory came with a cost that couldn't be carved into marble or sung in an epic. It would mean acknowledging that empires don't just conquer land, they conquer bloodlines, languages, futures. Centuries later, Plutarch wrote something that still stings. We remember the battles, we name the generals, we build temples to the gods who gave us victory, but the price of war is always paid by those we do not name. The daughters of Hellas paid that price not with their deaths, but with their erasure, and here's the terrifying part. The strategy worked. Within 2 generations, the mixed, blood descendants of Greek captives were serving in Persian courts, governing Persian territories, speaking Persian fluently. The cultural erasure Xerxes set in motion didn't end with him. It spread quietly, bureaucratically, until the line between conqueror and conquered blurred into nothing. This is what happens when the stories of the women left behind are not told. They don't just disappear from history, they disappear from existence, but not completely. Because here we are 500 years later, reading clay tablets from Persepolis, translating inscriptions from forgotten graves, uncovering one-line testimonies carved into stone by women who somehow understood that silence was the final death. And as long as we keep reading, keep translating, keep refusing to let their voices disappear, they're still here. Not the way they deserved, but still here. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths. Not the textbook version, but the version buried in bureaucracy and anonymous graves. If stories like this remind you how fragile memory is, how easily voices can vanish if no one fights to preserve them, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and help keep the past alive. Because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced 500 years ago.